Well, good afternoon, almost evening, everybody. It's wonderful to see so many people here in our lecture hall today to listen to one of our esteemed professors, Liz Aston, lead off on our Professorial Lecture series, which we hold throughout the year. Now, Liz is a very highly respected criminologist, and I just told Caitlin, her daughter, that she was very famous. You must remember that. And Liz is currently director of the Scottish Institute for Policing Research and has been in that role for some time, which is a significant role. It's a partnership of 14 universities across Scotland, working with Police Scotland and the public and others, which no doubt Liz will tell you more about during her talk. Liz's work plays a crucial role in shaping the future of policing in Scotland and beyond. And tonight she's going to share some key insights into local policing, including public perspectives on stop and search and the use of technology in law enforcement. She will also reflect on the importance of partnerships between academia and the police and how these collaborations can help improve practice and, most importantly, build public confidence and trust. Now, I share with you, I remember I have been in the, sorry, I never introduced myself. I'm Andrea Nolan, principal of the university. I've been here for 11 years. And when you come to a new place, you always like to meet people. And it was in the first few weeks that I was going around meeting people, and I met two people, I think it was, from criminology. And Liz was a lecturer in criminology at that time. And it sticks in my, there's lots of meetings that happen, but that stuck in my memory. I was telling other colleagues earlier this week, because Liz came in and told me the importance of her research, the importance of education, and how if we invested in her, she would really help with her partner in work to grow and develop the discipline. And now it is a hugely successful discipline with more than 12 members of staff, amazing research, and fantastic impact. And during the time here at that time, Napier University has really grown it significantly in its research strength and capabilities. And we're the top modern in Scotland for research power and impact. But of course, that happens because of the great work, commitment, passion, dedication, and talent of the staff that we have here in Edinburgh Napier. And Liz and the leadership she has shown around criminology are absolute evidence of this. So I hope you enjoy tonight's evening. I love these lectures. You learn so much. And I hope that they spark ideas and plenty of questions, because after Liz's lecture, Gary Hutchison, our Dean of the School of Applied Sciences, is going to host a Q&A. So enjoy this evening. Liz, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the warm welcome and introduction, Andrea, and thank you all for coming. We had a lot of people registered, but a lot of people messaging me saying, I'm so sorry, but I have to get home because of the snow, and I'm sick, and I really want to be there, but. So thank you all for coming. It really means a lot to me that you've made the effort. So when I was preparing this presentation, I was very much focusing on my research, and then I think it was Miriam pointed out to me, you also need to talk about your career. So I'll just start off with a little bit of reflection on that. So how did I get to this point? I started off doing an undergrad in social sciences in UCD, and it's definitely the fault of an inspirational criminology lecturer, Aegon Mulcahy, that I ended up here today. So after I'd finished that, having had a taster for some criminology modules, including policing in Northern Ireland that he taught, I wanted to do a master's. And I said, where should I go to do a master's? And he said the best places at the time were Keele, Belfast, and Edinburgh. And to be honest, I thought, well, if I go to Edinburgh, people might actually come and visit me. So that was my decision-making factor, and it seemed to work out quite well. So I did my master's, and as I was finishing my master's, I met Steve, my husband. So he maintains I stayed because I met him, but really we all know it's because I stayed to do a PhD. So did the PhD, Then I did an evaluation of youth diversionary projects at the Medical Research Council at Glasgow. Then I went to UWS and did a CIPER-funded postdoc on local policing in Scotland. And then I had my son Elliot, and I think at that point I realised I better try and get a permanent job. So I saw the criminology post at Napier, and I couldn't believe it. I didn't even know my own name. I was still on maternity leave, but I got the job. And the rest is history, really. So I'll talk you through some of the research projects that I've been involved in. And it went from me being the first criminology lecturer in the door to now, as Andrea said, there's a team of 12 permanent staff. So we've really grown the discipline. We've grown into successful criminology and policing programmes, thanks to all the hard work of my staff. And the second person who was in the door was Katrina. And I remember I wanted to hug Katrina, not just because I wanted another member of staff for criminology to work with, but because she was so lovely. And I'm really glad to have so many fantastic social sciences and criminology colleagues. So before I move on, actually, this stock image was in the slides when I opened up the corporate slides. And it just so happens that this is the first cohort of criminology graduates who graduated. I knew them intimately because I taught them on every single criminology module and developed them all from scratch until my other colleagues arrived. So I thought that was a nice connection there. So next, I feel like I need to get something out of the way. Is anyone here for CSI? Anyone come for a lecture on crime scene investigation? Because you can leave now if you did, because that's what we tell our prospective students. Criminology is not CSI. So apologies to those colleagues in the room who are criminologists and know all of this stuff inside out, but I feel like we've got, well, my kids, others who don't have such an intimate knowledge of criminology. So I'm going to start with some criminology 101s. So firstly, well, I'm not going to go into detail of all the evidence beside everything I present today, particularly these few things. I don't have time to go into the deep bodies of evidence and clever people who have come to these conclusions, but you'll just have to trust me because, after all, I am a professor now, so you just have to trust me that I'm telling you the truth. So first of all, crime is socially and historically constructed. What do I mean by that? It is differently defined and shaped in different times and in different places. So at different points in time, things are defined as criminal or not. Think about abortion, think about rape within marriage, homosexuality, lots of things. Drug policy I'll come on to later. It's very relevant to that. Secondly, the harsh reality is that state responses to crime are unevenly distributed. So this is really down to where is policed, who is policed, how it's policed, what is policed, and the responses of the criminal justice system and punishment. And that is not evenly distributed, for example, between street-level crime, white-collar, corporate, and indeed state crime. So that's important to understand. And it's also important to not acknowledge the colonial roots of policing and its role in maintaining power structures in terms of class, in terms of race, etc. So, thirdly, the criminal justice system, unfortunately, despite often good intentions, often makes things worse. So we need to acknowledge that as well. And with populist punitivism, the idea that the public tend to err towards more punitive responses, the role of research and having evidence-informed discussions with the public about crime and criminal justice policy are particularly important. So I'm just going to kind of go through some of the key messages I'm going to tell you about today. So if you think about, why is this important? Think about some key societal and policing problems of the day, such as the need for safety and protection, the role of police in maintaining social order, and not overusing their powers. What we need to remember here is the police have the power to withhold our liberty. They have the power to use force, and therefore there's a fine balance to be struck between ensuring safety, protection and public order, but not abusing those powers. So if you think about policing a protest and the riots this summer, for example, in England, There are important points as well there about victimisation and protection of minoritised communities. So these are some of the key messages I'm going to talk through, as well as safety and protection, the importance of engagement over enforcement, the importance of reducing harm that can potentially be caused by the police, the importance of accountability, public confidence, working towards equity in service provision, and the importance of partnerships and support to address wider structural societal problems. So before I start fully, I just want to, I wonder, are there any kids in the audience? There's a few kids in the audience. Is there anyone who needs to keep themselves awake apart from me, because I'm a little bit jet lagged? So I've got a little game for you. Well, not really a game, but watch out for the magic word. See if you can tell me at the end of the lecture what the magic word is. It'll start from the next slide onwards. So if you take the first letter of each of the words of the titles of the slide from here on, you might come up with a word, I hope, if I've done this correctly. Apparently this is an acrostic. So a wise friend of mine, Aisling, who's a teacher, taught me that. Every day is a learning day. So that's an acrostic, and thank you, Aisling, for everything you've taught me over the years, but also for being my Irish family along with Karen over the last 22 years. So I'm now going to get started. So this is the first word, unsurprisingly, research. So as Andrea mentioned, I've had the pleasure of directing CYPR for the last 6.5 years. We developed a mission for CYPR when I came into the post, and the mission is to support internationally excellent multidisciplinary policing research to enable evidence-informed policy and practice. And that's our mission. So we provide the infrastructure to support research, seed corn research, and enable knowledge exchange and discussion, bring communities, bring academics, police, policymakers, stakeholders together to discuss the evidence base, to fill gaps. Some of the research that's done by our members is about policing, but done very separately to the police. Some of it is in cooperation with, or collaboration with, or even co-production with the police. Now, although relationships are key to this and sustained routine interactions are key, it's important to have an infrastructure like CYPR to support that ongoing engagement and fostering that research and knowledge exchange. So that's what CYPR provides, that opportunity to bring people together, share evidence, and do research. Something else that the infrastructure enables is what I refer to as having a seat at the table. So it means that CYPR will be invited to nominate a member to be on an advisory group or a steering committee. And over time, as that infrastructure builds up, it enables you to be critical and speak truth to power in a safe space where you can affect change rather than shouting from the outside. Now, that's often challenging. There are power dynamics here, as there are power dynamics with the public interacting with the police. There are power dynamics as well in police-academic partnerships. So I'm not minimising that. It is a tricky line to tread at times. But it means that you can acknowledge the value of academia in police-academic partnerships. And that value really is about academic integrity, it's about independence, it's about criticality, and that requires continual reflection. But I think it's really important, you need the governance mechanisms, the collaboration agreements, and the funding. So in CYPR we have a fairly equal balance of funding from our 14 universities and Police Scotland and the Scottish Police Authority, which I think is an important balance to maintain. And I think it's also important, as well as that, the governance mechanisms and the collaboration agreement, that it's academically led. And I think that is really important here. So, secondly, engagement, second word of the afternoon. So going back to my CYPR-funded postdoc on local policing in Scotland, I looked at various models of local policing in Scotland, and one of the things that came out there was that community policing officers were being directed in some forces towards what's measured gets done. There were problems with key performance indicators. This was research that I did back in 2008, 2009. and there was a focus on enforcement-based activities like stop and search and fixed penalty notices that were being given for not wearing a seatbelt, using a mobile phone, etc. And officers felt they weren't able to do a lot of their more engagement, relationship and trust-building activities because those weren't being measured. So performance management cultures can really impact this. After that, there was reviews I did, for example, with my colleague Yvonne Hale on the literature and what's done, for example, in policing and what police actually do on the ground. And the evidence supports more engagement, relationship-building based approaches over enforcement-based approaches like stop and search, which I'll come on to later. I was also involved in a Horizon project called Unity with European colleagues, and we were looking at community policing across Europe with my colleague Megan O'Neill. She couldn't be here because she's in Europe at the moment. And we wrote this article in 2023 looking at the conditions, actions and purposes that facilitate community policing. We also did, as part of that research with young minoritised groups across Europe, and found that engagement, relationship building and confidence was really important in order to move towards equity in service provision, so people being able to access police services. I'll talk more about the online dimension of that later. So, legitimacy. Why is legitimacy important? If we think about trust and confidence and legitimacy, we've seen, a real decline in public confidence in policing in recent years, and that's for very good reasons. There's been a lot of scandals. It is a problem that needs to be acknowledged. Why is it important? Why should we care? It's not just about cooperation and compliance with the police, it's also about people's access to a service if they've been victimised, if they need to call the police for a reason, and how willing they feel and able they feel to do that. So in order for people to be able to come forward and ask for help, we need to enhance people's trust and confidence and ability to contact the police. The idea of procedural justice theory and the evidence around that is around the idea that the more fairly you're treated in an interaction with the police will shape how much confidence or trust you have in them. There's criticisms of this approach, and there's other ways of looking at it, but there is strong evidence to show that how you're treated, irrespective of the outcome, does have an impact on your levels of trust and confidence. So we began looking at this in the context of technologically mediated interactions. I'll talk more about this later. But we look in this article led by my colleague Helen Wells, we look at voice, politeness, respect, and key tenets of procedural justice, and to what extent these might be embedded in technologically mediated interactions. So I'll come back to that a little bit later. So accountability. Accountability and transparency is really important when it comes to public confidence in policing, and it's important in terms of improving and enhancing policing. So if you think about what I said earlier about the colonial roots of policing and acknowledging that, there's a lot of legitimate and valuable arguments when it comes to abolitionism and defunding the police movements. I'm not going to go into all that, that's not my area of expertise. But I have had discussions with abolitionists involved in policing in the US, and they've said to me that working as an academic to reform the police is useless and it's not enough. But I would contend that if we abolish the police, which may happen, or we work to defund, we need to acknowledge that someone will do some policing activity. And if that's members of the public or whatever bodies that is that will end up serving some kind of policing function, we would want those who are policing to be accountable to the public. So regardless of what future models of policing we have, accountability and governance is really fundamentally important here, whatever modes we have in future. So anyway, back to accountability of public policing. Oversight and accountability are really important, but sometimes a bit dry topic and hard to get your head around. So I'm using an example of our book, which we published this year, which I edited with my colleagues. So it was about governing police stops. So it took a while to get my head into this topic, but I took over the work from my colleague, Vicky, who sadly isn't with us anymore. So, as I said, transparency and public confidence is really important. Internal governance mechanisms are vital. So having good internal governance and scrutiny and collection of data, which I'll come back to. There's also a lot of importance to external accountability and oversight. So, for example, in Scotland, that would be Scottish Police Authority, His Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, independent police complaints bodies, etc. There's also a lot of value in civil oversight. So we saw this particularly in many countries in Europe where there weren't necessarily robust state accountability bodies. So the role of the public and civil society organisations in holding the police to account is really valuable, NGOs, etc. And having been in the US last week, we really see how this is particularly important where state oversight is weak. The public are needing to come together and collect data. So, for example, in the US, there isn't good data on police killings of the public, and they're having to crowdsource that data from media reports to develop databases to analyse that, sadly. But there's a lot of potential for more civil oversight. But the role of data is also really important here. So data is not, going to solve everything. But if we don't have data on police, like police recorded crime data or police recorded data on stop and search, how do you get a sense of exactly how bad some of the problems are? So it's not the silver bullet, but it's kind of the backbone to governance, I would argue, in the chapter that I wrote, that I led on writing in this book. We also explored the potential role of accountability technologies, such as the use of body-worn video. So there's exciting examples where, for example, body-worn video footage is shown to public scrutiny panels so they can scrutinise in West Midlands Police how police are doing stop and search. So that links me nicely onto technology. So there's a lot to say about technology. I'm just going to zoom in on one example that I've been involved in. I was involved in chairing the Independent Advisory Group on Emerging Technologies in Policing. Now, to reflect on that experience, I'll maybe draw on Ian Thompson, who I worked with in Police Scotland during the reform of stop and search. And he referred to working with the group of academics as juggling a bag of cats. And I think I understood what he meant when I chaired the Independent Advisory Group, because it wasn't just juggling a bag of academic cats. There was also lots of other organisations in there. So it was challenging, and I was doing it during COVID, on top of everything else, and online. So the Scottish Government said they'd never had one that had been started and chaired fully online, so it was a challenge. But we got there in the end. It might not be perfect, but we have a final report published in 2023, which I think is really valuable. We made some important recommendations, such as that the deployment of live facial recognition and certain applications of AI, for example, for predictive policing, would really benefit from the introduction of statutory codes of practice to provide greater clarity and safeguards. We also, we had 4 separate reports that were published, and then that was drawn into the final report. So the first area was really around the importance of robust legal frameworks that are based on human rights, equalities, and data protection. The importance of looking at research on ethical and social implications. So colleagues at the University of Stirling did a separate fantastic report on legal, ethical, and social implications of emerging technologies in policing. We also talked about the importance of research at various points in this. So the importance of public consultation and engagement frameworks, and those really being informed and evidence-based. The importance of research, development and innovation and scientific standards also being evidence-based. And the role of research, importantly, in providing robust oversight and scrutiny and review. So all the way from assessment of the evidence, requiring the assessment of the evidence base in business cases, from approval of technology right through to piloting and evaluation, and the role of research there. So those are some of the things that we emphasised in that work. So keeping on the theme of technology, the Interact project, this is a project that I've been leading for the last 3 years. It finishes this month. It's an ESRC funded project, and I've been working on it with my colleagues at Keele, Dundee and UCL. And I'd really like to thank those colleagues for all their work that have brought together these findings. So Helen Wells, Megan O'Neill, Ben Bradford, Arabella, Will, Rob Skinner, who's in the audience as well. Thank you all for all your work on the project. It's been a great experience. So there's a link here to our 5 briefing papers that we just published recently via that link to the Interact page on the CIPER website. There's also a QR code to one of our the first empirical paper that we've published. I'll just run through a few of the empirical findings. There's a lot more to say there. We did interviews in our case study forces and at a national UK strategic level on digital public contact. We did interviews, we did observations in force, command and control areas. We also did ethnographic fieldwork with officers as they went out in the public. We did focus groups with the public, online panel survey experiments with the public, and focus groups with 2 communities of interest, which included, we had picked because of their varying socio-linguistic needs and where technology may or may not be helpful there. So Interact is about investigating new types of engagement, response and contact technologies in policing. So what do I mean? I'm talking about how increasingly our contact with police is technologically mediated. So that might be digital online reporting, reporting a crime through an online form, through live chat, through social media messaging. It might be the fact that when you're interacting with the police, they're looking at their mobile data terminal or they have their body-worn video on. So it's increasingly technologically mediated, and we argued that we didn't know how that worked in terms of procedural justice and public confidence. So that's what we've been exploring. We found that there's a lack of research in terms of the police are making assumptions when they bring in changes. They're saying, well, of course the public want the same level of, they want to be able to contact the police in the same way as they use Amazon or order a pizza. So there was a lot of assumptions there, and accessibility needs often weren't taken into account and research wasn't done. So we're arguing that there's more need for public consultation and engagement in the development and incorporation of technology. There's a need for more involvement of equality, diversity and inclusion needs, and ideally to involve people with lived experience in co-design of that work. In our online panel survey experiments that Ben Bradford led, we found that the public, we gave people 2 groups, the experimental and the control group, identical chats. In one group, we told them that they were communicating with a human police operator. In the other group, we told them they were talking to an AI chatbot. But they had identical scripts of reporting a crime via this way, via live chat. And we found that, unsurprisingly, given algorithmic aversion theory, that the public prefer humans over AI in this context. We found that procedural justice is particularly important in digital reporting, and that people were more attuned to procedural justice when they were interacting with a human. There's lots of great work that came out of the work with communities of interest. So some of the work that Rob Skinner led with the deaf BSL using community, we found that there's a trust relay. So procedural justice is less effective when communication isn't direct. So with deaf BSL users, they're contacting the police using a video service relay, which is great because there's often an assumption that, well, they can use a text-based system, but English is not the first language of most people who are in the deaf BSL using community, so there's a misunderstanding of accessibility needs there. But when video service relay is being used, the trust can be mediated between the trust in police can be mediated depending on what happens with the technology or with the interpreter. So technology seems to be mediating this. We also find that trust is essentially a precondition of technology adoption. So technology is not a silver bullet that's going to solve accessibility problems. You need to have trust in the police in order to contact them using technologically mediated forms. And it underlies a lot around the importance of in-person engagement and long-term relationship building in communities, and that comes from our work with in the public focus groups in our case study areas as well. Also, channel choice is really important. So, for example, if you take autistic individuals that we spoke to, channel choice is particularly important because for some people, having the ability to contact the police in your own time using an online form rather than having to phone or look at someone in the eye in person could take away some of that anxiety and pressure. But for other people, having to choose between some drop-down menus could be anxiety-inducing. So we need to have a range of ways for the public to contact the police to report crimes. And for the public in general as well, they were still keen, given some problems with digital exclusion as well, that they should be able to pick up the phone or go into a police station and not be forced to use digital routes. Two-way communication is really important here as well, and technology can sometimes assist with that. So if you submit something, you need to get a response back to acknowledge it's been received. You need feedback or an update to say what's happening with the status of your crime report, and that could be fulfilled through online portals, etc. But importantly, ideally, this two-way communication is in person, and it's about relationship building in communities. So that's that project. So continuing on the online theme, I mentioned the Unity project earlier and the work we did there. This article that we published in 2023 that you can find on this QR code, it argues that we found that engagement was really important in building trust, particularly of minorities across Europe, to share information online. So in terms of the willingness to share information, for example, through a community policing app, that engagement and relationship building was important in terms of having that trust. Other work been doing in the online space is through the 3PO project, which is an unusual project and not in line with our usual research. This is about online harms to public-facing professionals and their dependents, their children and family members. So work that my colleagues at Napier have been leading, so Shane Horgan, Yenny Wong, Andy Tatnall and myself have been involved in the work on managerial officers and how they're responding to online harms. What we find is that some of these online harms are disproportionately impacting minoritized officers. There tends to be a focus within organisations on reputational damage and risk rather than well-being of officers and responding to that. It tends to be more of a professional standards and disciplinary type route rather than a well-being and support route. And I would argue potentially that given this impacts minority officers more, there's potential institutional discrimination in terms of the responses there and the lack of organisational support. And we know that the more fairly you treat people within your organisation, so the more fairly officers are treated by their organisation in an organisationally just way, the more likely they are to police the public in a more procedurally just way. Okay, so naloxone. So there's various projects I've been involved in where there's an intersect between public health and policing. I'm just going to use naloxone as one example. So in terms of the background here, just to explain, so naloxone is used to reverse opioid overdose. And in this example, it's used intranasally, so you squeeze it up somebody's nose. So the background to this partly it began, so we've had a really good naloxone distribution program. Peer administration and distribution in the community is the most important thing. And that's been the case in Scotland for quite some time. We started a conversation, Inga Heyman, who couldn't be here tonight, and myself were chairing the CYPER conference in 2018 on policing and public health. And I organised a panel where we had a discussion about police carriage of naloxone, a lot of opposition, but we started the conversation. The Drug Death Task Force was formed and in 2019, and they recommended that police should carry naloxone because unfortunately in Scotland we have a massive drug-related death problem. Obviously naloxone is not the solution here, it's just a sticking plaster, but it's one part of the jigsaw. There was a decision that there was going to be a pilot of police carriage of naloxone In Scotland, I was on the naloxone delivery steering group and said that we absolutely needed to evaluate this. The police agreed. We managed to get an evaluation team in place led by my colleagues in School of Health and Social Care. Peter Hillen and Nadine are here. So that evaluation really showed that although there were tensions, there was opposition from the Federation, there were questions around legal challenges, etc., naloxone is a safe and effective first aid harm reduction intervention, and that it was acceptable and feasible to officers. There were tensions, there were findings in the report around stigma from police officers, unfortunately, towards people who use drugs. And there wasn't recommendation within the report to address that stigma. There was a recommendation as well to roll out naloxone across Scotland, but also that this is only part of a multi-agency response to drug-related deaths. There needs to be a lot more work than that. But as a result of the findings of the evaluation, Police Scotland made a decision to roll out naloxone. It's now carried by all operational officers as part of their first aid kit. And sadly, it's so needed in Scotland that despite the fact that ambulance are the ones to respond, it's just if the police come across somebody, they can administer naloxone and reverse overdose before the ambulance arrives. Sadly, it's been used almost 600 times already within just 2 years. The project has been highly commended at the Higher Education Awards this year and is up for Research Project of the Year at the Times Higher Education Awards at the end of the month. So, stop and search. There's absolutely tons I could say about stop and search, and we're getting further on in the lecture, so I promise not to go on too long. I'll just briefly say that in Scotland, there was some great research done, including by Kath Murray, a PhD student at the time, research by other academics as well, including an evaluation that Megan O'Neill and I did on the Fife pilot approach. And along with an independent advisory group chaired by John Scott QC, all of these recommendations came together to influence and shape massive change in the environment. So there was legislative change, the introduction of a code of practice, the abolition of non-statutory stop and search, which was where people were searched without reasonable suspicion. So the volume of stop and search reduced, which is fantastic. But problems still continue, as my colleague Estelle Clayton, who researched stop and search during its reform, as she has shown in some of her recent publications. Bottom line in terms of stop and search research is that there's a disconnect between the stated intentions. So it's stated policy-wise as being there to prevent violent crime, to find knives, etc. However, the practice and reality on the ground is that it's targeted mostly towards drug possession and predominantly used on young people living in socially deprived areas. That tends to be where it's targeted, and it's low-level cannabis possession is the majority of what is actually found. And the majority of the time people are searched, about 75% of the time, nothing is found. And there are reviews now which show the impact on people's mental health, as well as their trust and confidence in policing. So I could talk about this all day, but I'll just zoom on. Globally, the point to make is that globally there is disproportionality and racial disparity and discrimination in terms of the use of stop and search. We know that from police recorded crime statistics in the UK. Black people are far more likely to be searched in England. Those figures show across Scotland or across Europe, although we don't have police recorded crime statistics on stop and search across most of the European countries. But if we look at Fundamental Rights Association self-report data, it shows that Black people and other ethnic minorities, and particularly Roma Gypsy travellers across Europe, are disproportionately searched. So we need to acknowledge that problem, and maybe think about more systemic and policy relevant ways to think about changing that, including decriminalisation or, better still, regulation of drugs. So, connected to that, in terms of harm reduction, we have, there's a fantastic book by Matt Bacon and Jack Spicer. Maria Fotopoulou and I wrote a chapter on policing of drugs in Scotland, which sadly has very little empirical data in it because there really hasn't been much research. But essentially we argue in this chapter that police can contribute to structural violence, or they can be instrumental in leading on a harm reduction approach, and that's borne out in other chapters of the book as well. People who use drugs have human rights, obviously, and those include access to health services and harm reduction services within that. And sometimes when these areas are policed, where stop and search is used disproportionately, people will not attend harm reduction services because of fear of criminalisation. So I was involved with Tessa Parks and colleagues at Stirling, doing some research to build the evidence base for drug testing services. So this is where people can bring a rice-sized grain amount of drug to be tested to see what's in it, and it's a gateway to harm reduction services and support. So my colleague Danilo Falzon, who's now doing a PhD with us, led on an article about the police views on policing around drug checking services, which you can look at, but it also has relevance for other harm reduction services such as safer consumption facilities, which are coming in Scotland. So I think it's important to acknowledge that when it comes to harm reduction policing in Scotland, there's a good policy environment. So the purpose of policing is to enhance well-being and safety. That's enshrined in legislation. There's a rights-based approach in Scottish government legislation. But what we've argued in our chapter is that there's a dissonance between the policy context and what's happening in practice, because 81% last time I looked of stop and search in Scotland was on grounds of Misuse of Drugs Act. So people are being policed for drug possession despite policy intentions. So at a time when the police are wondering what to do less of, I would argue that there's an ability to achieve harm reduction policing by doing less policing in this context and making sure that the police don't make things worse even when they're well-intentioned. So it wouldn't be a lecture without talking about impact, I guess. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a dirty word, but really what we're talking about here is making a difference. And this is where, practitioners and policymakers' desire to improve services, make things better for society, does coincide with academics. Most of us came into this job because we wanted to do something that makes a difference. So there's a lot that can be said about how to facilitate impact and develop pathways to impact. But I do think when we talk about policing, that police-academic partnerships can have a key role in trying to facilitate impact. So bringing together the research, the knowledge exchange, funding research that is of relevance to policing, and helping facilitate and create pathways to impact as a result. We're working with the police to try and maximise those pathways to impact, but also to document the impact that's occurred, because often that's very difficult to do. So there's a lot more that can be said about that, and I think there's lots of points at which research can be more embedded as part of the structure within policing at various points, which I've alluded to already. So in CYPR, we wanted to acknowledge the impactful work that people were doing. So we brought in Impact Awards, a main award and an Early Career Researcher Award a few years ago. So this is one way to acknowledge that. We're still learning at CYPR how to do this. We're all learning how to do impact, but it's really interesting and there's a lot more that we can do. Also, reflecting on the stop and search examples, we'd be naive to think as academics that we can make changes happen by ourselves. We can't. It's about the media, it's about politics, it's about public perspectives and opinions. In order to make real meaningful change on the ground, you need to bring people on that journey with you. And so there's a role for civil society organisations, NGOs, the public, and a whole load of other actors beyond whoever your key stakeholders are in order to drive meaningful societal change. So, partnerships. As I said earlier, well-being and safety are in the purposes of policing in the Police and Fire Reform Scotland Act, but collaboration and working in partnership is also mandated in there, as is engaging with the public. Partnerships, preventative activity are really key here, and in terms of a public health approach, essentially that's about trying to involve research evidence, data, working in partnership and collaboration, and trying to drive more preventative rather than reactive activity. I'm now involved in a CSO-funded project which just started this year called the Health Justice Nexus, and that's led by my colleague Kat Smith at Strathclyde and involves colleagues at Napier and Glasgow, and that's quite exciting. We're going to be looking at crime and criminal justice as social determinants of health, and I'm involved in the policing strand there, so watch this space. I think that'll be an interesting one to come. Anyway, in terms of well-being as a core police mandate, a lot of that needs to be done in partnership. So this image here is from a graphic artist who captured some work at our CYPR conference last year, which was on this topic. We had a panel discussion about it. But the important point here is that there are key, structural societal problems, such as inequality, and these need to be addressed in partnership and by a range of other actors beyond the police, and by investing in social services. So a lot of the problems we're talking about that touch on policing, it's really what we need to invest in is public services and trying to work to reduce inequality. Furthermore, problems such as racism and discrimination need to be addressed at a societal level across a number of organisations beyond the police, as my colleague Nasa Mir has argued. So, finally, I promise, support. I think in order to achieve more equitable society and more equity in the academy, it's about support at a societal level, it's about investment in community, it's about investment and support of many organisations. So that CYPR infrastructure has really supported me along the years as well. I need to acknowledge that. So I wouldn't be where I am right now if it wasn't for CYPR. I would have been drowning in teaching probably for a long time. It helped to get me research active again and keep me going. So, and I'd like to thank Nick Fife, who was the previous CYPR director. He's mentored me at times. He couldn't be here tonight, but I'd like to thank him. I'd also like to thank others, including Gráinne Barkness, I think is here, who practiced her coaching skills on me and got me at a time when she asked me, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? And at that point, what I was doing was just everything that the students needed, everything that other staff needed. And I, to be honest, wasn't thinking about where I was going to be in 5 years' time or what I needed or wanted to do. So that really helped me as well. So I think this support, mentoring, all of this is really, really important here. The CYPR infrastructure continues to support PhD students and early career researchers. So the first photo here is at the International Summer School for Policing Scholars, and yeah, you might say we went on a jolly to Australia, and we did, but it was hugely worthwhile. You know, hearing the students talk about and reflect on the experiences they had there and what they got from it. You can read about it in our annual report. There's lots of great personal reflections in there of what the students got from it towards the end of the report. It was also beneficial to the staff who came, so like CYPR colleagues, so Monica, Andrew and Megan are in this picture. I think Monica has a blowfish cocktail glass in her hand here, which maybe it's blurry enough so you can't see that, so I shouldn't have said anything. But I could not do what I do and what CYPR does if it wasn't for Monica. She's my right-hand woman. Also, Simon, I think Simon's here, all the associate directors, Andrew, Megan, Andy, Kirsteen, Leslie, Penny, all make it happen, and as do a lot of the other members in CYPR make it happen. I'd also really like to thank Andrew, Gary and Andrea for all their support over the years, which has been fantastic. The support of lots of colleagues in the School of Applied Sciences, particularly Claire. I see Claire, you're here. They have helped me to learn about leadership, and I've learned a huge amount from them and their guidance. Thank you to all the colleagues I've mentioned in various presentations and projects that I've been involved in. It's always a group effort. I'd like to thank all those colleagues and friends who were colleagues as well, colleagues who were friends, like my friend Vicky, who sadly went too soon. And Vicky, if anyone ever met her, she really knew how to speak truth to power. And Vicky, I know I need to do a hell of a lot more to live up to your legacy. So thank you to CYPR colleagues, Unity colleagues, Police Stops colleagues, Interact colleagues, everything. Collegiality is super important to me. I'd particularly like to thank all my Edinburgh Napier colleagues in social sciences and criminology. I was actually looking for a photo of my criminology colleagues. So I was scrolling through the criminology WhatsApp chat, and it was just a mess of pets, Halloween photos, GIFs, more GIFs, photos of people's books, PowerPoint presentations, people being on TV. But I could not find a decent photo of everyone in the group. So I'm going to have to share an AI-generated image that my colleague Shane created when he asked for an image of criminology colleagues at Christmas. And so it seems that this is a warning, kids, don't use ChatGPT because it thinks that criminology is CSI as well. So thank you to all my colleagues. It's really great working with you all. Last but not least, my family. So my mum and dad, my mum's been a fantastic role model to me. My dad has used to proofread my work, doesn't do it anymore, but they've been fantastic supports all the way along. My sister, who couldn't be here today because she's doing her PhD, and my niece, my mother and father-in-law, Steve, and the kids, Elliot and Caitlin, who really have put up with me, especially in my periods of overwork, which I have managed to get out of at times and then fall back into. So thank you all for all your support. Yeah, family, really important. So why don't we ask AI what a perfect family looks like? And then you might get this. Yeah, my family did go insane last year. But they are lovely and I love them very much. And before they're hugely embarrassed, I'm going to move on from that slide. So thank you all for your support. Thank you for coming. And that's me. I forget, I promised. Can anyone tell me the magic word? Is anyone paying attention? I have chocolate, especially anyone under the age of 15 first. Come on, were you not listening? You're not getting any chocolate. Elliot, do you know? Relationships, very good. It's all about to me, it's about the infrastructure as well. You need to invest and you need to have infrastructure, but it's about relationships. That's what it makes all of this worthwhile. And I'm really grateful to you all for your support, and I look forward to continuing working with you lots of you again in the future. I'll have the chocolates here at the end for anyone who wants one. They're from San Francisco. But over to you, Gary, now.
Thank you, Liz. It's a great pleasure to have this event, and I think you'll all recognise what a fantastic lecture that was, and how detailed and how broad you covered the topic of policing, from health to structural decision-making from government right through to operation. I'm absolutely proud to have Liz in the school. She's a fantastic role model, and my job today is to open up the floor to you to ask our professor any questions you may have on the huge array of work that you've done over the years, Liz. So,
be nice. Any questions? Don't be shy.
Yes, please, in the centre here. If you could just wait for the microphone to come, because we are recording this, and just for people in the room that might not be able to hear the question.
How are you doing? My name's Carsten from Prespect. I'm just wondering if you were talking about the police stop and search even though it was against policy, they were still using the Drug Misuse Act. Do you think that targets are part of the problem for that? They're going for the low-hanging fruit?
So it is very much within policy to search on the grounds of Misuse of Drugs Act. So drug policy is a reserved matter for Westminster. So it can become a bit of a political hot potato between Holyrood and Westminster drug policy, because obviously there's control in Scotland over policing, over justice, over health, over everything else, but not drug policy. So the changes that happened in Scotland were about removing the ability to search someone with no reasonable grounds for suspicion. It was just, hi, can I search you? Okay, you're in a position of power, I say yes. So it is legislative and legal for the police to stop on grounds of Misuse of Drugs Act. That is within legislation and policy. I mean, police officers do say, you know, if they brought in decriminalisation and removed the ability to search on grounds of Misuse of Drugs Act, I think the police would see that as a problem, because they'll say you can't smell a knife. So they use drugs as a way to get hands in pockets, essentially. Yeah. Does that answer your question? But sorry, you asked about targets. Yes, targets can be a problem, and I've just seen an announcement that targets are coming back in England. So yes, that is hugely problematic when it becomes a red, amber, green on numbers, and what's being measured is enforcement. That is hugely problematic. What you need to look at is how one of the things you could look at is like what percentage of times an item is found. And what we found in Scotland through the work of the Independent Advisory Group and colleagues like Susan McPhee is that when the volume of stop search declined by about 70%, the percentage of times an item was found increased. So a more targeted approach to searching less people with proper grounds makes it a more effective approach. But every search that happens has a negative impact on people, and still 75% of the time no item is being found, so it should be used less and much more targeted on. If you see something on CCTV, a knife, then you go and stop search that person rather than just more broad brush approaches.
Thank you, Liz. Anybody else want to ask? Yes, please, Miriam at the front.
Evening, my name's Callum. I'm an operational police officer in J Division in West Lothian. So by virtue of your work and the work of CYPA, I now carry naloxone, and I've seen it used on a number of occasions. So thank you in the first instance. I was wondering if it strikes me that naloxone is a very shining light example of academia and operational, resulting in a very tangible benefit for myself as police officer and the individuals I work with daily, including members of the public. I wonder if you could reflect on what were the aspects of that project, of that collaborative effort that seemed to make it so easy to roll it out and make it operational, where there are certain key stakeholders or certain players that were very much on board, and where else do you think that could apply in your current academic work?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think in that example, obviously the Drugs Act Task Force was behind it, and a huge number of high-profile organisations, the government, as well as senior individuals within the police. I think there were key individuals who were responsible for making that pilot happen within police, such as ACC Gary Hutchison, and there were others in the senior leadership team who were not convinced, but then were more convinced when they had the academic evidence. So I think you're right, it is an example of where academic research can have a role, but like I said earlier, I wouldn't be naive enough to think that we can just go around doing research and everything we recommend will magically happen. It is very much about, right place, right time. You can be lucky, you can be unlucky. It's about media, politics, decision-making, funding, public interest, and a whole load of other levers that can go on. But that example wasn't easy as well. There was opposition from the Police Federation, which you can read about in our paper.
Thank you. Question over? Same question. Oh, yep, got a question up here. And then I think it was in the middle.
interested in what you said about the link between officer communication, stop and search, and procedural justice. I know there's some research in the U.S. that says that communication behavior training is sometimes started in some police institutions, it can be fragmented from normal police skills, or it's hard to get buy-in from police officers, or it lacks evidence-based knowledge to inform it. I was wondering, from your experience, how have you found communication behavior training for police officers, and what's its role?
Okay, great question. I haven't been involved directly in any of that communication behaviour training. I know some of my colleagues who are involved more in the education and leadership side of work in CYPR will be more familiar with the police training in general, so I can introduce you to some of them later if you like. I do know that the training that happened during stop and search reform was really important, and part of that was about explaining to officers about the negative impacts on young people and what that meant for them, because officers are often not considering the negative impacts of those interactions. They're thinking about their operational needs, but definitely how it is done has an impact. But stop and search, I think, is an example where, yes, you can make it more procedurally just and be more respectful in that encounter, but the experience of being stopped and searched is not a positive thing and one to be avoided wherever possible.
Thanks, Liz. Just at the back and centre.
Hi, Rob.
Hi, Liz. Rob Skinner here. Great talk. Really enjoyed it. Thank you. So my question is about co-design and lived experiences. What do you think we can do as research institutions, academics, to try and increase more co-design in our research and include those lived experiences there?
Thanks, Rob. Yeah. So, as you know, with the Interact project, we designed it and we didn't design it in a co-design way, and I wish we had, but we didn't. We kind of did our best in the circumstances to ameliorate some of those concerns by involving yourself. But it would be much better if we started with a co-design process from the beginning. I know colleagues of mine are leading a network. It's called On the Margins. Talent Guma from within Edinburgh Napier is leading on that, and that's working between practitioners, academics and researchers to look at co-production and co-design and how we can embed that more in research. So I think it's definitely something I would like to learn more about and do in practice, particularly in the areas that we've discussed. I think it's also something that we are trying to encourage the police to do more from the outset when they do public consultation engagement, to ensure that's informed and to ensure that that's a key part of the process when changes are happening. So thank you. Let's talk more.
I think we're getting close to the end for questions. If there's nothing burning, I'm going to take Chair's prerogative. Oh dear. So Liz, I was really taken by the fact that you're such a talented communicator, and you've talked about the navigation of working with police, government and all the rest. How do you manage academic independence of the research that you do when you've got to work so closely with a policing organisation?
I think I tried to allude to this, but it's difficult to sort of verbalise it concisely. I think it is about, my colleague Alistair Henry's written about this, about the need for continual reflection. So the value that academics bring, I think, is that integrity, criticality and independence, and that can easily be eroded. So you need to continually sort of sense check yourself and continually reflect, like we do in research. We need to be reflexive practitioners and reflect on your positionality and what you're doing. It's not always easy, and I might not always get it right, or we might not always get it right, but I think it is about that continual reflection and, you know, reflecting on what you're saying and being brave and say, like, I try and speak my mind, I try and say what I think, I try and bring the evidence and be as critical as I can, but I think you need to also have the relationships, the infrastructure, the ability to feed in and have those conversations in a trusted way. So it's difficult. That balance is difficult, but I think it's something that if you work on it and continually reflect, you can try and maintain that independence and criticality. I mean, with Stop and Search, we had a situation where we were given, 250, I think, track changes comments on a report. So we had to very clearly say, we are looking at factual accuracy checks here if there's something we've got wrong, but we are not changing our findings. So you have to put your foot down. I mean, that's obviously a basic, and I think having the right agreements, collaboration agreements, understandings from the outset is really important to that. And I think CIPR can sometimes provide a bit of a voice at strategic level to raise some issues that are happening when it comes to independence as well.
Lovely, thank you. Well, I think we'll all agree that Liz has done a lot right, and she has had a huge impact on policing in Scotland and beyond. So I think, credit to what you have achieved. I think maybe it's a chance to just give one last round of applause to Liz and say thank you for taking us through this today. If you have any questions that maybe you didn't feel comfortable asking in the audience today, please stay. There are some drinks and some canapes downstairs at the main entrance. If you want a chance to speak to Liz, I'm sure she'll be delighted to talk a bit more about her fabulous career to date. But it just leaves to say thank you for coming this evening. We very much appreciate your support, and it's lovely to hear from one of our top professors in her career. So thank you, Liz.
Thank you. So please join us downstairs for drinks and canapes, and come and claim your chocolate if you got the magic words.